As we've heard from sessions yesterday and this morning, there's been great progress in using cellular therapies to repair damaged tissue, to treat cancer, multiple sclerosis and other rare diseases. But if we're to really help the multitude of patients who are in dire need of some of these treatments, the question then becomes, how do we accelerate these emerging technologies? How do we scale their delivery whilst still maintaining safety and efficacy? And to discuss this topic, I'm very pleased to be joined by an eminent set of people. From the end, Desirée Cox, who is the founder and CEO of HEALinc Innovation and chair of the National Stem Cell Ethics Committee in Bahamas. Andrew von Eschenbach, who I think everyone knows, president of Samaritan Health Initiatives and former commissioner of the US FDA and 12th director of National Cancer Institute. Dr. Henry G., chairman and president, chief executive officer of Sorrento Therapeutics. To my right, Janet Marchibroda, Director of Health Innovation Initiative at the Bipartisan Policy Center. Marisa Papaluca, Senior Scientific Advisor and Scientific Committee's Regulatory Science Strategy at the European Medicines Agency. And last but not least, Krishnendu Roy, Robert A. Milton Endowed Chair and Director at NSF Engineering Research Center for Cell Manufacturing Technologies and Director for the Marker Center for Therapeutic Characterization and Manufacturing at Georgia Tech. So we decided we're going to try and keep this as fluid a session as possible so that you hear from me as little as possible and from the people who matter as much as possible. And what we're going to try and do is structure the session so that we initially start and look at the future of cell therapy, where this is going for patients, what that means. We'll then go and look at, so what does the ecosystem need to look like for that future vision? And finally, we'll start to explore, so what is the paradigm that we need to support this ecosystem and future vision? And with that in mind, I'll start and just maybe ask Henry, tell us a little bit about, from your experience and working in the field, what do you see coming up in the future for therapies and technologies?
Thank you very much. You only give me 2 minutes. It's very difficult to describe the future. But let me, let me tell you, what I'm going to say is, as a biotechnology company, a biopharm company, we always envy the internet company because their valuation goes very quickly and the scale goes up very quickly. In the biotech, you spend 15 years, you work in one drug, and sometimes you get lucky, you get approved, sometimes you don't. But let me tell you, the cell therapy side, the future is here. The internet space, the internet era is here. It's called a www.med, okay? What is the www? It's called what. What do you deliver to the patient? And where? Where you deliver the cell therapy medicine and the when. So that's the one we are working. Sorrento is a therapeutic company, NASDAQ-listed company. We actually have all the tools as of today in the company working on the www, or called the what, where, and when. Let me tell you the what. The what is if we're using the CAR-T as an example. So you deliver the CAR, which is a chimeric antigen receptor. So that has the outside with the antibody. And inside it was the stimulating factor or co-stimulating factors. So as of today, CD19 using an antibody as a single chain, it's mouse antibody. How can you improve that? Of course, you want to say, can we do a human antibody? And since all the co-stimulating factor or factors inside is all similar, now whoever owns more antibody can make more CARs. So Sorrento has more CARs than anybody in the world right now. We have about a few dozen CARs, and we screen about 150 targets already, have a few dozen active CARs in the company. And one of the example is the CD38 CAR-T we have with our partner, Cellularity. You heard Dr. Halari mention the CD38 CAR-T. We're also doing the BCMA CAR-T for the multiple myeloma. Now, we talked about the CAR-T. The question is, what kind of cells are you using? Now, if you do autologous, you're using the alpha beta T cell. That's everybody using, but that's not ideal. So what you want to do is, if you can go a step further, you're using the allogenic type, which is gamma delta T cells, which adult to have, or the cord blood cell has it, or the placenta has it. That's why we're working with Cellularity, working on the off-the-shelf cells, which is placenta T cells, or the placenta NK cells. So that's what you deliver. You deliver the CAR T, but you have to systematically looking at it. What is the best for the CAR, what kind of antibody you're using, what kind of cells you're using, and then critically, what kind of combination of the CAR into the cells? What kind of tool you're using? And now we're to a stage we can using gene editing tools to do that instead of using retrovirus or lentivirus. That typically takes 2.5 years to get an IND package together. Today, if using technology gene editing, you can do that within 6 to 9 months. That means you can do multiple CARs very quickly. That gets to very close to the internet stage. Now, I'm going to keep the other two, where to deliver and when to deliver, as the backdrop, because I have 2 minutes already up.
So I'd like to dive in, since Dr. G has started on a rather cheeky note. I'm going to come at it from a different direction and say that what's impressive to me about the future, leading and creating what this could look like in the Bahamas, which is, sitting with all of the big boys and girls here, would be unheard of before this time, would be considered, the point would be democratizing, that the reality is innovation is happening everywhere. It's not just happening at the traditional centers of excellence. And so the opportunity of regenerative medicine, and I see the future as regenerative medicine, precision health, with a focus on prevention, with reversing illness, and only a tertiary focus on treatment, and virtualize health. The opportunity for new spaces is to use that as a platform or anchor to drive development of scientists, new scientists in developing country spaces, with an opportunity, especially women scientists, to look to the future, not just in terms of the types of cell and the types of and the medical paradigm, but the type of education, the kind of vision. And so from where I sit, I see democratizing that will come with the digitizing and will come with the new paradigm as being a big part of the future vision for health. And it will mean new players, different players. And we're certainly not aiming to be the FDA or the EMA, but there are opportunities that are possible for new spaces that are not encumbered by the history and that kind of legacy, in which you can move more in a more agile way. And one of the unique spaces, I think, for some aspects of the region, if you're willing to do it right, and we're very committed to doing the science properly, to doing the proper monitoring and evaluation, ensuring that the data makes sense, beginning with the safety, and not overstating the efficacy component, because really we don't have the volume of data that we need to say that with the kind of conviction that sometimes you hear. But to recognize that this is a space where your intellectual property would be protected because of the new laws. This is a space where there are specific laws around stem cell and regenerative medicine, which speak to the way it's ethically managed and judged, and speak to the monitoring, evaluation, and the structure around that, as well as a regulatory space. And there are new laws, and this is very critical, that not just focus on opportunities for regenerative medicine and stem cell therapy, but the enabling digital technologies that will take that to the next level in terms of scalability and opportunity. So that's what I would like to add to what my colleague said.
Would any of the other panel members care to?
Yeah, I wanted to just carry on in Desirée's point of democratizing cells, but I want to come at it from a different angle. And the angle here is we really need to see the future as going beyond first-in-human trials, phase 1, phase 3s, or treating 1,000 patients. I remember last time when we were here, Pope Francis said, you know, the ethics of access, right? How do you take it to millions of patients around the world, regardless of their socioeconomic status? So to me, manufacturing, lowering cost down, ensuring reproducible quality batch after batch after batch, industry understanding what quality actually means. I will guarantee you almost no one of us knows what a good quality cell means, that we need to control for every batch to be exactly the same. And you cannot make a product out of it unless you know that. Scalability, certainly we will talk about that later. But there are three areas that hopefully we will get to elaborate later on. One is this issue of quality. And we need to understand quality, we need to make reproducible quality, and we need to make sure what is the highest quality of cell that gives us the best results. The second area is that of logistics and transportation and distributed manufacturing. So if you are to take this to millions of patients around the world and have these amazing products treat them, you got to get out of centralized manufacturing because we really don't know in most cell products how to ship and how to keep them exactly the same quality over time and space. So distributed manufacturing is the future. And then the third area really is continuous monitoring. There is no product that we currently manufacture where we do not measure the quality of the product and control the quality of the product throughout continuously during the manufacturing process. Biologics is probably the only set of products where we do that, where we wait 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 6 weeks to know that a batch has failed or we have a not sufficient product. That does not make an industry. And unless we can industrialize this, we will never be able to treat millions and billions of patients around the world. So we need to figure that out as we go along. So,
thank you. Marisa, would you like to give a perspective from the regulator, and also maybe if you have something from the patient perspective of what this future looks like?
Yeah. Okay, as regulators, I'm here representing the European Medicines Agency, and we cater for promoting first and protecting public health for 500 million of European patients, plus patients all around the world, as we have also processes which have an impact in low and middle income countries. So we recently could demonstrate that the impact of our work is really huge in low and medium income countries. So we don't have the luxury of the crystal ball. So we have to be very solid how we behave and think in predicting the future. So for us, the future are the seeds, some of which we have seen here today, and many others which are sort of producing gems already all across the world. Of course, in particular, we know very well what's going on in Europe. We have about 500 ongoing clinical trials just on advanced therapies, which includes gene therapy, cell therapies, and tissue engineering. And our specialized committee, the CAT, has seen already 211 promising advanced therapy medicinal products. So the future is here, but we have a very little yet mature products coming across. So we were able only to approve a bunch of products, maybe 12 overall. We have 4 in the pipeline, cell therapy products being evaluated as we speak. So what is the future for us? The future for us is to look at how these products come across, how academia, for which we create special framework to work together. Last year was launched, and offering academia free services for them to be able to be sort of guided in terms of which would be the applicable framework, which would be the applicable, not all the existing requirements, which are the applicable ones for innovative products. And in this way, having these platforms, participating to conferences like this one, we actually co-evolve with science. We think that the time of regulators being the gatekeepers, saying yes or no, either for a clinical trial or for a marketing authorization, are over. It's the time now for us to engage very early as possible, and not alone. We want to engage with the academia, we want to engage with the industry, but also to really ensure that our works are not in vain with payers, with a technology assessor earlier on. And in the future, we think we will have to do more with the financial industry as well, because it's very nice to ask things, but there should be someone there to pay for it. We have already great influence and work with the European Commission when it comes to framework program for promoting innovation in the space of research. But clearly, we need to reinforce our muscles also in other areas. So the future is here. It's nowhere else. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's move on to, we've heard a little bit about the future. Let's move on to the ecosystem and what's required. And since the last conference here 2 years ago, a lot has changed in the US in terms of the regulatory environment. And I'd like to ask Janet and Andy, who were two people who were involved in some of driving through these changes, to say a little bit about what's changed, and not everyone will know. So if you could just bring us up to speed on what you were involved in and how that changed.
Absolutely, Tosh. Well, I would say, I still remember being here 2 years ago in the spring. Andy, you were here, Tommy Thompson, Tosh, Senator Frist, former Senate Majority Leader Frist. And that was the spring of 2016. And then at the end of 2016, something really big happened that I think is having a really positive impact on the field. Congress passed almost unanimously on a bipartisan basis, I'm at the Bipartisan Policy Center, the 21st Century Cures Act, putting about $6.3 billion into the system and really taking steps to accelerate the discovery, development, and delivery of safe and effective cures and treatments to patients. And there were a number of regenerative medicine provisions, actually, and I still remember Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell saying that the regenerative medicine provisions were the most important provisions in the bill and had a lot of support from other leadership. So really quickly, because I know we're in a conversation and we want to move quickly, I'll just give you the highlights. First, there was about $30 million in funding for research, and I know maybe Francis Collins will talk about that later today, which was the first. You know, we went from 0 to 30 million. Need a little bit more as we're looking forward. But probably of most interest to the folks here in the room, the law provided the FDA with the authority to expedite its review of regenerative therapies. So basically, an accelerated approval process. And the FDA, since that time, has really moved forward quickly on implementing the law. It's called RMAT, Regenerative Medicine Accelerated Therapies Program. And so you would say, okay, they are implementing the law, but what's really the impact? And in a very short time, I would say, what, a year plus 4, about 14 months, they've approved, we went from 0 to 16 approved products, cell therapies and gene therapies. The law was not prescriptive around what types of therapies would be covered, 12 in 2017 and 4 more this year. And you know, the other thing that's been really wonderful is the amount of technical assistance. When I talk to companies who are going through the process, they're saying Peter Marks is working with them. They're getting a lot of help as they go through the process. So I would say, to answer your question, a lot has happened since our last Vatican conference, and it's all good news for patients.
Andy, I'd like to ask you to come in and...
Well, I think it's important to point out that not only has FDA been legally empowered by virtue of the 21st Century Cures Act, but I think there's also a cultural empowerment at the agency. It wants very much to be able to move these kinds of innovative, transformational therapies forward. And so one of the things that is going on is a much greater engagement between the Food and Drug Administration and the scientific community and the biotechnology community that's developing these products. It's along the lines of what Marisa was leading to. This is now got to be an integrated, collaborated effort. And both the regulatory agencies, as well as those of you who are discovering and developing, have to be working right from the very beginning of the processes in a conversation and dialogue, first of all, to get the science right, and then to be able to produce the kind of data that creates the credibility upon which reliable regulatory decisions can be made. Because there are not only lives at stake, that's the critically important question, but the whole industry is at stake. Because if it's a continuous process of smoke and mirrors and false promises, it will crash and burn. And so we are at a very critically important time where we have to absolutely be passionate, not just as regulators, but as developers and funders, et cetera, around the passion around the precision of the science.
If I can just jump in, I completely agree with what you said, but I want to throw something else into the pot, because often when we speak about these processes, there's a kind of logic, a straightforward logic that absolutely makes sense, but there is, in many cases, a gap between that and the reality. And the reality is getting data is not easy. Getting data from in regenerative medicine therapies after the patient has had the therapy, and the follow-up data that is so valuable is not easy. The second thing that often jumps out at me is we're operating from some very old-fashioned, we may be encumbered by some very old-fashioned or not correct reimbursement models, which means that paying for these treatments, and this is particularly true if people receive their therapies outside of the US, is out of pocket and is disadvantageous in many cases to the patient. And that's not something that we can leave out of the equation. And then there is this other piece, which is about, it's slightly askew to this, but I think it's very relevant to the future innovation and what else needs to be in the ecosystem, is the work done on underserved communities. So without that data, without patients and people in underserved communities being in the conversation, being in on the registry conversation at the beginning, it still, quite frankly, remains a very US-focused or European-focused database registry conversation with really potential other players who may have disruptive, innovative ideas being out of the conversation right from the beginning. And so I want to throw that in, not in a sense of blaming, but really from a sense of that we need to see this as a global conversation and a global collaboration. We do need to find more creative, modern ways of engaging, not harmonizing, but engaging right from the beginning. There are amazing ideas that I'm seeing in the Health Innovation Incubator I've created that can be valuable for patient access because they are coming from potential patients. They're coming from ordinary people who may not be healthcare educated, but have got valuable ideas about how to connect with people. We need to find ways to take those passion projects and those ideas to startups and to bring those into the ecosystem as mechanisms of true access so that they are in the conversation about access. They're co-creating the future. The future isn't being something that is visited upon them or they become victims of.
Thank you, Desirée. I'm just going to move the conversation on a little bit to bring in Marisa, because because we talked a little bit about the regulatory landscape in the US, and I'd like to hear about the EU, which has had many things like PRIME and advanced therapy medicinal products for a while. If you could just give us a quick flavor of where the EU is in terms of the regulatory landscape and the ecosystem.
Thank you, Tosh. I will keep the chronometer under control here. Well, we come from a completely different situation because in 2001, we created a platform which is called the Innovation Task Force, which was there only to listen to absolutely unknown and unseen products. A few years after this in operation, we prompted the legislator to legislate about this kind of products, which were not products yet, were just prototypes. And we had, in 2007, legislation on advanced therapy medicinal products, incorporating cells, genes, engineered tissues, and combined gene cells and devices. And the beauty of this law is that recognize the specificity of this new field, and also created the first committee and the only committee in the world where we had multi-stakeholder competencies built together, okay? So this group is the one who looked at the 211 emerging products I mentioned before. In the meantime, we realized through our fora that to have a product is not enough. And here I want to build on the comment of a colleague here. We realized we need much more than the product for the product really to reach the patient. So we start looking at which technologies, which methodologies, which tools you need to make this available. And we start working on additional manufacturing strategies and methods, and decentralized bilayer or multi-layer 3D printing, bioprinting is all something which you've already seen, again, as prototypes, but very promising. And to make a long story short, after a few years of coming to force of the new legislation, last year in, I think, 2017, yes, 10 years later, we say, let's touch with reality where we are. We have 500 clinical trials, we have 200 products already classified where we are. So we had a conference, a workshop, actually not a conference, with all the people involved, and we identified, based on experience, not on promises, not on thinking, but on the data we have reviewed so far, we identify areas of improvement, things which make life easier. So Europe is proposing now revised GMP for advanced therapies, cell therapy, revised GCP will be ready next year, a new process to streamline the interface of the committees for making the best possible scientific evaluation. And we launched last year PRIME, which means priority medicine. And you will be delighted to know, 1 year after launch, 41% of the designated priority medicines, which means we come with you up to success. Day after day, we follow you and we give you continuity and regulatory certainty of where you go. 41% are advanced therapies, either genetically modified cells or vectors for gene therapy. So this is where we are, and I think I exhausted my minutes. That's okay. Thank you, Tosh.
Chris, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of carry on a little bit, add to Desirée's and Janet's point as well as Marisa's point. There is really a sea change of the 21st Century Cure Act, and really, as Andy mentioned, a cultural change. So you may not have seen, some of you have seen, just a few days ago, the FDA released a request for proposal through NIH. It's an R01 NIH coming out of the FDA asking for better manufacturing technologies, continuous manufacturing, continuous monitoring of the cell product, deep characterization of the cells, with the NIH is taking lead out of the 21st Century Cure Act. These were unheard of a few years ago. So there is now a very different mentality across. And then the NIST and DOD and NSF funded over, what, $200 million in the last couple of years, just on the biomanufacturing piece, including the center that they fund us for almost $40 million. Through NSF. So there is huge investment from the federal government that is really talking about a mentality change in the US at least.
Yeah, just...
Can I just add one little point on this one, really specifically? There is also a change on the role of industry. We have an industry which changes in its role, being, I would say, providing services together with the product, or providing services to other companies developing cell therapy. So creating centers for manufacturing, dispersed center for manufacturing, only with the consistency of the quality of the product. So this is really a revolution, and more importantly, the use of advanced therapies in the use of various technologies in development allowed us really to modernize even the preclinical requirement, to understand that we have better things than animal studies to go ahead with the development of products. So I think this is a change really in culture, not only of regulatory and funders, but also in culture of industry.
Absolutely agreed. I mean, all of these federal investment is backed by at least 1 to 2 to 1 to 3 industry investment, and that has been really eye-opening to see how industry has come in to bring this around.
Andy, you wanted to come in, and maybe you could also say something about the current safety mechanisms which exist as well, because...
Just a quick commentary on, first of all, as far as Marisa's comments. I think I've seen much greater cooperation among regulatory agencies as well, whether it's EMA and FDA and the Japanese, et cetera. So that's another piece of the cultural change. And then as far as Desiree's concerns, one of the things that 21st Century Cures also enabled, in addition to accelerated approval mechanisms for cellular therapies, is it really allowed for post-market engagement. Patient-reported outcomes can now be incorporated in the regulatory decisions. So there really is this attitude and empowerment to engage directly with products after they've been preliminarily approved, but getting data from patients directly from sources. So that's going to advance things. The safety issue, I mean, regulatory agencies do not work in a vacuum. They are working in response to societal's direction as related to their lawmakers and policymakers' directions. And there is a great deal of enthusiasm, but there's also skepticism, especially among lawmakers. And so the concerns about safety are still real, and there's still the emphasis on being able to assure that these products are in fact being made under the appropriate circumstances. There's still concerns about what it means with regard to minimal manipulation of the products in order to get approval. So again, it raises the point you made earlier. This is an ongoing dialogue that has to occur between the regulator along with the scientific community and the community that's producing and developing these products, the industry.
Yeah. Henry, I'd like to just bring you in very quickly on giving the industry perspective on the ecosystem, and then followed by that, Janet, maybe if you could say something about registries and how that might be incorporated into this ecosystem as well.
Thank you, Tosh. Give me the opportunity. I thought I only get a chance to talk one W. Now I got the other two. I can talk about it. Okay, so actually, yes, each W is 1 minute, all right? So actually learning from my CMO, which is Jerry Zuda, he's sitting there. He's the one did the Revlimid, all these. He's former CMO for Celgene. The one approach you have, develop a drug, is talk to the regulator. So the company has to actively talk to the regulator. We have engaged with the discussion with the regulator, and the one approach to go is go low, go slow. So for example, if we talk about the where, now you can always go, instead of the cytokine release syndrome caused by the massive activation of CD19 CAR T cells, what you can do, what if you do a local? You can do local injection. So we have clinical trials going on right now with a local injection, and that's where you can think about it smartly. Where you inject, instead of systematically into the bloodstream, what about you go to the organ with the tumor in it? That will reduce your systemic exposure of the CAR T cell activation. That's one way to do it. What about you thinking about instead of into the bloodstream? What about into the lymphatic system? A lot of the stuff you have causing issue is because you inject the drugs into the bloodstream. While the cells you want to act on, for example, the T cells, they are in the lymphatic system. So our company is working on both on the local delivery and the different way to deliver. So that covers the way, where. And let me quickly, 1 minute, to cover on the when. So that's very critical. The when is, you want to do is, you want to go low, go slow. Because sometimes you don't know the safety. And sometimes the guys who want to do drug development always want to see the results quick, efficacy results. Actually, the regulator is more worried about the safety side. If we can have approach, go low, go slow, you divide the CAR-T total cells into maybe 3 different batches. Instead of 1 batch you inject it, they may cause a massive cytokine release syndrome. You go slow, you see the first one. If there is nothing happens, you go the second one. So we have this approach. We talk to the regulator. They're very receptive. So I think this is very critical to talk to the regulator.
And I think one of the things that comes up when we talk about the ecosystem is registries as one component or potential component. Janet, could you just say something about that?
Yeah, I'll just spend a couple of minutes. So this field is relatively new in the United States. And so as the use of cell therapies starts to grow, we really think that we need to systematically track health outcomes, safety, and efficacy, actually through a national cell therapy registry. Now, these are not new. I mean, almost every medical specialty has one, from thoracic surgery to cardiology, list this long. And we also, in the United States, have something called the C.W. Bill Young Transplantation Program. And I see Randy here. His group, actually, this has been going on since 2005. They have a registry for patients who have received bone marrow and cord blood transplants. So this already exists, and you heard Dr. Kurtzberg's, some of her discussions about that. And so we'd like to build on this program. A number of us, you heard from Bernie Siegel yesterday at the Regenerative Medicine Foundation, the Bipartisan Policy Center, STEM for Life, and then working in collaboration with Fred Sanfilippo at the Marcus Foundation, are really interested in moving forward a national cell therapy registry that will look not only at safety, but also at outcomes. And we think it can help. Actually, the law, 21st Century Cures, talks about registries as real-world evidence to help with approval. And this can also, I think one of you, Desirée, you talked about reimbursement. I think a registry can also support some of those conversations that private sector payers and CMS have about reimbursement. Can help a lot.
Thank you. Christian, I'm just going to bring you in 1 second. Desirée, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I wanted to say something that speaks to the things that have been danced around. One of them is the area of predictive analytics, which I think will be important for the reimbursement or the new paradigm of reimbursement and that conversation. And the second, that there has to be a recognition that the horse is out of the gate as far as patients with passports are concerned. And so within this conversation of regenerative medicine, there will be the dreaded or not dreaded medical tourism conversation with all of the connotations of that, depending on, and I'm not going to go into that here. And with that, I think this is an opportunity. I think this is an opportunity for enabling technologies that are about tracking the chain of custody of biological materials as well as information. So I think the fact that you have to deal with the fact that this is a global conversation and the safety and efficacy and analytics aspect of that will or can be an opportunity to shift the paradigm around collaboration, because I'm not impressed. if I am to be direct, with the extent to which we are truly collaborating. And I'm also not impressed with the sense of comfort about patient-reported outcomes and patient data. I've been very impressed by what I've heard from patients speaking at this conference, and I think we have a lot to learn about the range and quality of data that can come from patients. And I think we would be wise to take heed to rethinking our conversations about that.
Right. Marisa, could you just 1 minute give us a little bit about registries in Europe? And then, Krish, maybe I can bring you in as we move into the new paradigm part of the conversation to talk about scalability.
Well, I would like to say a couple of things. One on registries, which is about the fact that we started, I would say, an oversight of registries in the entire European Union 3 years ago. We mapped all of them, and we identified those who would be suitable for tracking safety and efficacy of medicinal products. So we have quite a strong setting now in Europe, whereby there is no need to start something new. We use the registries as already are there out, and which have sustainability. The second point about the registry is that we are working on common data protocols. So not common protocols, because this is not possible. Doesn't cater for the diversity of the approaches, but common data structures. So we can really nurture then the results of an analysis. And the other thing,
sorry, can I just ask, are these registries outcome-based as well, or are they?
Yes. They're outcome-based. They are not product registries. They are disease registries, and they are really long experience in what they do. The other things I want to give this audience as an input is that, of course, I am very much into what we do in Europe, but it should be very, very clear that for many, many years now, we have clusters conversation on ITMPs with the Food and Drug Administration on a regular basis. Every 1 or 2 months, we discuss hot issues with them. So what happens in Europe and the experience which is accrued in the United States has not been reinforced by the new provisions in the United States.
I'm getting the beady eyes that tells me that there's 3 minutes left. So just to wrap up, Krish, if you can bring us into the new paradigm, and then I'm going to open it up to everyone to talk a little bit about harmonization versus standardization, and what do we need in this new paradigm? Is it the same as we've always done, or is it something different?
Great. I mean, the conversation ties into the use of scale. I will give a very quick 10 seconds example from the monoclonal antibody field, which is very, very matured right now. There's still a lot to be done. But if you go back and ask the MAB people, what changed life, what they would say is initially when we came in, we thought we have to make these vats and vats and kilograms of monoclonal antibodies. It is when they found out through biophysical fundamental science what is the best quality of antibody that works, the need for scalability went 2-3 orders magnitude down. So understanding quality through big data analytics, through registries where you can correlate cell characteristics with patient outcome and patient characteristics. I mean, the need for registries, I cannot overemphasize how critical that is. And then comes scale. So whether you scale out or whether you do distributed scale manufacturing, understanding quality, and you may not need 100 million cells to be injected if you found the right ones. If you look at the CAR T data, actually probably 1 or 2 clones stays in the patient and are active. It's not the whole gamache of cells that's being injected right now. And that implicates safety, that implicates manufacturing capabilities, the scale that you need to be. So it's a whole systematic approach to look at scalability.
Any final thoughts on heterogeneity, standardization, harmonization? And given the vast kind of technology that's out there and the huge pace of change that we have in interconnectivity.
Yeah, well, I think society clearly is depending upon regulatory agencies to look after its interests, but I don't think the answer lies there alone. I think the industry itself has to become much more self-policing and self-disciplining with regard to separating the wheat from the chaff and making sure that the scientific principles, whether it's for discovery or manufacturing, et cetera, are really the things that are going to keep the field intact.
I'd like to underline the importance of registries mentioned by my colleagues. That's one. Two, I cannot stress enough the importance of the rigor and the science and ethical evaluation of these therapies in their prototypes or their feasibility stages as they go, and I cannot overstress that. But I would like to throw in again the importance of diversity in the conversation, the importance of multiple stakeholders. And I know we have multiple stakeholders, but there can be an echo chamber in the way that we choose the people that will make the process faster and easier. I think that will not serve the industry at this critical turning point. And I think it's very important, and we cannot say enough about the extent to which we can learn from patients in thinking more deeply about analytics.
Thank you very much, Desirée. I'm sure we could talk about this topic for a lot longer. It remains for me to thank you, the audience, the Vatican Pontifical Culture Council, and also the Cura Foundation for your time and the opportunity to be here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.